The restaurant was glowing with warm lights, soft enough to make everything feel calm, almost safe. My graduation cap rested beside my plate, and everyone kept congratulating me, praising my achievement. Silverware clinked, waiters carried sizzling platters, and for a moment, it felt like the happiest night of my life. Until Grandpa cleared his throat. He leaned forward on his cane, his eyes sharp and piercing, and asked, "How's the medical treatment I paid for last year?" Time seemed to stop. My fork hovered midair, my uncle froze with food halfway to his mouth, and my mom's hand trembled around her glass. I blinked, confused. "What treatment?" I asked. Grandpa frowned, his gaze piercing my parents. "The one from the hospital, the one I paid for. They said your parents signed the papers." My uncle slowly lowered his fork. My dad swallowed hard, and my mom dropped her napkin like the ground had been pulled from beneath her. Grandpa's face turned red, and he pushed himself up from his chair, the legs screeching against the floor. His voice thundered across the table. "What did you do to my grandchild?" The entire restaurant seemed to freeze. My heart pounded violently. I didn't understand what he meant, but the fear on my parents' faces told me they knew. On the night I was supposed to celebrate my achievement, a hidden darkness from my past threatened to surface. That moment set the stage for a revelation that would shatter the foundation of my family and uncover betrayals I never could have imagined. My name is Ava, and until that night, I believed my family was complicated, maybe chaotic at times, but fundamentally safe. Grandpa Richard, the man who had always been my rock, never missed a school play, birthday, or achievement. He had a blunt, no-nonsense way about him, but loved me fiercely and protected me in ways I often didn't understand. Mom was quiet, gentle, and apologetic, always trying to keep the peace. Dad was loud, practical, and confident. He knew what was best, even when it conflicted with my well-being. Uncle was the family wild card, charming, funny, and seemingly harmless. But Grandpa never fully trusted him. Growing up, I assumed my world was normal. I worked hard in school, held part-time jobs, and stayed up late studying to make my family proud. Graduation was supposed to be my one shining moment, a night to celebrate my future. I wanted Grandpa to see that his support had mattered. I wanted Mom and Dad to know I had achieved something on my own. And yet, that question from Grandpa, the one about medical treatment, changed everything. Suddenly, my childhood memories, my parents' strange secrecy, and the whispers I had ignored for years snapped into focus. Something had happened to me in the past, something hidden, and my parents' roles in it were far more complicated than I could have imagined. That realization left me both terrified and determined to uncover the truth. As a child, I was sensitive and cautious, prone to fainting and easily catching colds. My parents always took me to local clinics, claiming routine checkups, but I never saw bills or received proper explanations. Dad rarely attended these visits, leaving Mom to handle everything. Grandpa noticed discrepancies, questions unanswerable, set in hospital trips, hushed phone conversations, and became concerned. One summer, he followed us to a clinic after noticing my fainting spells. Mom panicked, Dad argued over the phone, and Grandpa, sensing something was wrong, requested paperwork. Mom lied. The pattern repeated over the years, set in hospital visits, documents signed without my knowledge, explanations that didn't make sense. My uncle sometimes borrowed my identity for forms I never saw again. Envelopes of cash were handed to my parents for medical purposes with no record of treatment. Whispered arguments late at night hinted at panic and secrecy. I didn't understand them then. I trusted my parents, my uncle, my family. I never questioned why so many decisions were made for me without my knowledge. Looking back, those moments were warning signs of something hidden. But at the time, I only remembered confusion and the vague feeling that something wasn't right. Every small, unexplained injury, every set-in checkup, every whispered fight about documents or identity made sense only after Grandpa's dinner table confrontation. It all pointed to a past that had been deliberately obscured, to secrets that were about to unravel in a way I never could have imagined.
The moment that changed everything came that night at my graduation dinner. Grandpa's question about the medical treatment I supposedly received last year was not just confusing, it was terrifying. My mind raced as I tried to recall any hospital visits, any procedures, anything that could explain what he was talking about, but nothing came to mind. I looked at my uncle mid-bite, frozen, his eyes wide, and I realized for the first time that he knew something I didn't. My mom's hands trembled violently, her face pale as if she were about to collapse. Dad's jaw clenched so tight I could see the tension in his temple. Grandpa rose slowly, his voice shaking with anger yet controlled. "What did you do to my grandchild?" Silence filled the room. Other diners glanced over, sensing the intensity of the confrontation. The words hung in the air like a thundercloud ready to break. At that moment, the comfortable celebration I had imagined vanished. The question had opened a door to a truth I was not prepared for. I knew something terrible had happened in my past and that my parents and uncle had been involved in covering it up. My stomach churned, my chest tightened, and every heartbeat reminded me that the life I had trusted was built on lies. Grandpa's glare, sharp and unwavering, fixed on my parents, left no room for denial. It was in that moment I realized my journey to uncover the truth and reclaim my life was about to begin. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about love and trust, was about to be tested. That one question, simple in words, but devastating in implications, set the entire story in motion, forcing me to face the reality that my childhood had been manipulated, my body and identity had been used without consent, and the people I loved most had betrayed me in ways I could never have imagined. The hours after Grandpa's question were a blur of tension and fear. I could feel the weight of every glance, every whispered conversation I had ignored for years. Grandpa demanded answers, and my parents struggled, stammered, and avoided eye contact. Uncle slouched in his chair, trying to shrink into himself, but his presence made everything heavier. My heart raced as Grandpa confronted them with each inconsistency, the unsigned receipts, the strange hospital visits, the envelopes of cash. Every detail he mentioned was a thread unraveling the carefully constructed lie that had covered up my childhood trauma. I felt a mix of anger, disbelief, and fear as the pieces began to click together. I remembered moments from my past that had seemed normal, but now took on a sinister meaning. Those routine checkups, the whispered fights at night, the frantic phone calls between my parents and relatives, all of it was part of a pattern. Grandpa's voice cut through my swirling thoughts. "I know something happened. Tell me the truth." My mother finally spoke, trembling. We were trying to protect you." But Grandpa was relentless. "Protect you? By allowing this to happen? By lying? By signing papers without your consent?" The words reverberated and the air seemed to thicken with accusation. My father muttered excuses, but Grandpa's gaze didn't waver. He called the hospital to verify records, while my parents' faces grew pale, realizing the evidence could not be hidden any longer. The receptionist confirmed every detail: the emergency intervention, the consent forms signed by my parents, the procedure performed without my knowledge, all verified. Each confirmation felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I had been deceived by the people I trusted most. Uncle tried to intervene, his voice weak and trembling. "It wasn't supposed to be like this." Grandpa's glare pinned him. "It was supposed to be hidden, wasn't it? You all thought I wouldn't notice?" Tension escalated further as Grandpa made calls to the authorities. My parents realized their lies had consequences. Uncle's guilt and my parents' panic filled the room. I sat frozen, listening to the unraveling of my life. The familiar walls of home felt suffocating, charged with betrayal. Every sound, the ringing phone, the faint whispers, the clinking of dishes in the kitchen heightened the pressure. My thoughts raced. How could they have done this? How had they kept such a secret? And most importantly, what would happen next? Grandpa's presence was the only constant, guiding me, steadying me, reminding me that none of this was my fault. His calm insistence that truth must be faced gave me strength. I realized that the confrontation had escalated far beyond dinner. It was the moment that forced hidden trauma into the light, demanding justice, accountability, and action. My parents' carefully built walls of secrecy were crumbling. I was witnessing the collapse firsthand. After the confrontation at home, Grandpa insisted that we go through every record, every hospital document, and every detail of my past medical treatment. He wanted absolute clarity, and I felt both terrified and relieved that someone was finally seeking the truth on my behalf. At the hospital, the staff verified everything Grandpa had said: the emergency intervention, the signed consent forms, and the reasons for the treatment. The words level 3 emergency intervention and internal trauma struck me like a hammer. Every memory I had ignored as a child, the sudden rushes to clinics at night, the whispered fights, and the frantic phone calls between my parents and relatives suddenly made sense. My body trembled, my stomach churned, but I knew I needed to understand what had really happened. Back home, Grandpa began piecing together the events with my parents and uncle. My mom broke down repeatedly, confessing that they had been trying to protect me, but the explanations made little sense. "We thought if you didn't remember, it would be easier," she whispered, tears streaming. Dad admitted that fear had driven him to sign papers without explanation. Uncle's role became painfully clear. He had orchestrated the trauma that led to my hospitalization. His presence, once familiar and somewhat comforting, now felt suffocating. I could feel my trust evaporating, replaced by anger, betrayal, and disbelief. Grandpa guided me through the questioning, gently reminding me that none of this was my fault. He emphasized that uncovering the truth, no matter how painful, was the first step to reclaiming my life. As days passed, we reviewed every hospital visit, every record, and every unusual occurrence in my childhood. I discovered hidden patterns, minor injuries that were overlooked, suspicious incidents that were covered up, and a network of lies that my parents and uncle maintained. Grandpa's methodical approach revealed not only the medical details, but also the intent behind each action. It became clear that the people who were supposed to protect me had prioritized secrecy over my well-being. My mind reeled with the implications. I realized that my childhood had been manipulated, and the people I trusted most were deeply involved in concealing the truth. Yet, amidst the shock and fear, I began to feel a glimmer of empowerment. I was learning that knowledge was power, that uncovering the hidden truth was my first act of taking control. Grandpa stayed by my side throughout, offering reassurance, encouragement, and guidance. He reminded me that my life, my body, and my future were mine to reclaim, and that facing these horrors head on was not only brave, but necessary for my healing. Through this painstaking process, I began to piece together not just the events of my past, but also my parents' and uncle's motivations. Fear, shame, and misguided attempts to protect me had led to catastrophic decisions. While their actions were inexcusable, understanding their rationale allowed me to start processing the emotional fallout. Grandpa emphasized the importance of separating the trauma itself from my self-worth. I realized that surviving such manipulation, deception, and abuse had forged resilience and courage within me. The discovery phase was harrowing, exhausting, and painful, yet it was also the foundation for reclaiming my narrative and preparing for the confrontation that would bring accountability and justice.
The day of the confrontation arrived, and the tension in the house was almost unbearable. Grandpa had insisted that all of us, my parents, my uncle, and I, sit together in the living room while he laid everything out. The room felt smaller than usual, as if the walls themselves were pressing in, charged with fear, guilt, and anticipation. Grandpa placed the hospital documents on the table, each page a testament to the lies and betrayals that had been hidden from me for years. His voice, steady but sharp, cut through the silence. "We have the records. We know what happened. Now it's time to tell the truth." My uncle shifted nervously in his seat, avoiding eye contact, his fingers fidgeting in his lap. My parents sat rigidly, their faces pale, hands clenched, eyes darting between Grandpa and me. I could feel my chest tightening, my mind racing with questions. How could they have done this to me? Why had they lied? What kind of person would betray a child in this way? Grandpa began reading the timeline aloud, the procedures, the signed consent forms, the emergency intervention, and the reasons cited in the hospital records. Each sentence pierced through the protective bubble I had built around my childhood memories. Finally, Grandpa looked directly at my uncle. "You orchestrated this. Explain yourself." Uncle's voice trembled as he muttered, I didn't mean for it to go this far." Grandpa's eyes flashed. "You didn't mean it? Do you have any idea what this child went through? Do you understand the lifelong scars you've created?" My mother began sobbing, burying her face in her hands, whispering, "We were trying to protect her. We thought if she never remembered." Grandpa slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing through the room. Protect her? By signing documents without her consent? By hiding the truth? By letting this happen? My father swallowed hard, unable to meet anyone's gaze. "We were scared," he admitted, voice shaking. "Scared of what would happen if the truth came out. Scared of losing the family. We thought we were helping." Grandpa's glare did not soften. "You were not helping. You were betraying. You were complicit. And now it's time to face the consequences." I felt a mix of fear and relief. Fear because my parents and uncle had hidden so much, and relief because finally someone was holding them accountable. I could finally ask the questions that had haunted me for years. Why me? Why did they betray me? Grandpa answered in my stead, reminding me that I was not to blame, that the betrayal belonged to those who committed it, not to the victim. As law enforcement and support personnel became involved, my uncle was taken into custody, my parents faced questioning, boundaries were firmly established, and I felt the first stirrings of empowerment in my chest. Grandpa remained my anchor throughout, offering reassurance and reminding me that the truth, no matter how painful, was liberating. By the end of that confrontation, the lies had been exposed, accountability had been demanded, and the foundation of trust in my family had been shaken irreparably. Yet, despite the chaos, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I was no longer in the dark about my past. I understood the betrayal, the complicity, and the secrets that had been kept from me. More importantly, I realized that facing this confrontation, enduring the pain of truth, and witnessing accountability were the first steps toward reclaiming my life, my identity, and my future. After the confrontation, the house felt eerily quiet, as if it were holding its breath. The tension that had filled the walls during the confrontation now lingered like a heavy fog. Uncle had been taken into custody, leaving an empty space where trust and familiarity once existed. My parents sat on the couch, exhausted and pale, still processing the gravity of their actions. They were remorseful, yes, but their guilt did not erase the betrayal. Every glance, every sigh reminded me that the people I had relied upon the most had failed me. I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and relief. Anger at the deceit, sadness for the childhood I had lost, and relief that the truth had finally surfaced. Grandpa remained my anchor, steadfast and unwavering, reminding me that none of this was my fault and that I deserved honesty and protection above all else. The days following the confrontation were intense. Lawyers, social workers, and law enforcement officials became a constant presence in our home. I had to recount memories I had long suppressed, describe the suspicious hospital visits, and clarify incidents that had been carefully hidden. Each retelling was painful, but with Grandpa by my side, I felt supported and safe. My parents' remorse was evident. They tried to explain, to justify, and to beg for forgiveness, but I realized that my healing could not depend on their redemption. I needed to reclaim my identity and autonomy first. The evidence of their actions was undeniable. The hospital records, the signed consent forms, and their own admissions confirmed that the secrecy had been intentional. Grandpa's calm insistence that truth must be acknowledged gave me courage. He reminded me that while the betrayal was theirs, my response and healing were my own. Through this fallout, I began to assert boundaries. I insisted on speaking freely without interruption, demanded transparency, and refused to allow fear or manipulation to dictate my emotions. Every interaction with my parents and extended family now was governed by these boundaries. Slowly, the home began to feel less like a place of hidden danger and more like a space where I could start reclaiming my life. The fallout was a mixture of emotional turbulence and cautious empowerment. I understood that while some relationships might not return to what they once were, I could control my present and future. Grandpa's presence, support, and unwavering protection were crucial, and I knew I could count on him as I navigated the aftermath. The immediate fallout was painful, shocking, and disruptive, but it laid the groundwork for my long-term recovery, resilience, and the eventual reclamation of trust in myself and those who truly deserved it.
Months after the confrontation, life began to settle into a new, fragile normal. My uncle's legal case proceeded, and the reality of his betrayal became a permanent mark in our family history. My parents tried to rebuild trust, attending counseling sessions and attempting to demonstrate remorse, but the bond had been irrevocably changed. Grandpa remained my steady presence, celebrating small victories and helping me reclaim memories and autonomy that had been suppressed for years. I learned to separate the trauma itself from my sense of self-worth. I realized that surviving deception and abuse had forged resilience and courage within me. I became more independent, assertive, and protective not only of myself, but of others who might be vulnerable. My friends, initially unaware of the details, adjusted to my new boundaries and supported me as I navigated the changes in my family. Extended family members gave space for healing, respecting the fragile trust that remained. Each day, I grew more confident in my ability to set limits and demand honesty. The long-term consequences were painful, yes, but they also became empowering. I reclaimed control over my life, refusing to let the past dictate my choices. I documented my memories, my experiences, and my healing process, understanding that owning my narrative was essential for personal growth. Grandpa continued to guide me, reinforcing that love is not blind loyalty, but protection, honesty, and advocacy. Through the long-term consequences, I learned that trauma, while devastating, could also be transformed into strength, resilience, and a deeper understanding of the people and forces that shaped my life. In time, I found peace not through forgetting, but by reclaiming my life. Grandpa reminded me that family is not defined solely by blood, but by loyalty, honesty, and protection. Forgiveness was complex and nuanced, but it became a tool for my own peace rather than a reward for my parents. I documented my memories, collected evidence, and established my autonomy, fully reclaiming my identity. I was no longer the child who could be manipulated or silenced. I was Ava, a survivor, empowered and resilient. The past had shaped me, but it did not define me. I had faced betrayal, deception, and trauma head-on and emerged stronger. My experiences taught me that the truth, no matter how painful, is liberating. I learned to trust my instincts, demand transparency, and protect my boundaries fiercely. Through reflection, I realized that the darkest moments in life could also reveal strength. I could choose my narrative, assert control over my identity, and rise above deception. Grandpa's unwavering support had shown me the meaning of true protection, advocacy, and love. I had regained my voice and my power.
While some relationships could never be fully repaired, I had learned to prioritize my well-being, embrace personal growth, and cultivate relationships built on trust and respect. The resolution was not a perfect ending, but a reclamation of my life and identity, a reminder that even the deepest betrayals could be transformed into empowerment. Thank you for following my story. If it resonated, please share your experiences in the comments, like this video, and subscribe for more real-life family drama stories. Hit the notification bell to stay updated on stories that reveal secrets, betrayals, and the power of resilience. Remember, no matter how dark the past may be, your strength and truth can guide you to empowerment. Life is not defined by what was taken from you, but by how you reclaim your voice, protect your boundaries, and rise above deception. This story is a reminder that even in the most challenging circumstances, there is hope, clarity, and the possibility to transform trauma into strength. Stay brave, stay honest, and never underestimate the power of speaking your truth.